still a lot to be assessed as to whether or not the utility Eversource is going to be responsive in future years, and I certainly welcome their responsiveness this time around, but I'm going to keep the pressure on. In fact, keep the pressure on strongly so that performance is rewarded, not simply the costs of repair or maintenance. And there's a lot to be done to make this system more resilient. Part of what we're doing in Washington is an infrastructure program that will, in fact, create and reward resiliency. Part of our infrastructure program is aimed at resiliency and climate change, and we need to do more of it in Connecticut and provide more investment in Connecticut. So I think we're moving in the right direction on a number of fronts, and obviously we're going to be watching this situation to see whether that last number of homes is down to 25% now, still out, see how quickly they are restored in Canterbury and elsewhere around the state.
Thanks, Dick. Really quickly, let me just thank the First Selectman, the Governor, for getting Connecticut ready for this storm. Obviously, this is not close to worst case, but we always plan for worst case. And I want to thank everybody around the state who took steps yesterday to put themselves into safe situations, to check on their neighbors, to make sure their neighbors were okay. We look out for each other in Connecticut, and I think that's part of the story as to how we got through the day. It's sunny here, but it is still raining pretty hard in western parts of the state, and so we still have to monitor this storm. There's going to be a lot of rain that's going to fall on Connecticut today. There's still a potential for trees to come down and for significant flooding throughout the state. Our job as a federal delegation is to make sure that every dollar of federal reimbursement comes to Connecticut that we're deserved under law. So we'll be working with the governor and the governor's team over the course of the next few days to assess the amount of damage in Connecticut and see if we qualify for federal reimbursement. Obviously, we don't have the kind of damage that we thought we were going to have. So we'll very carefully monitor damage assessments. We'll talk to all the towns as to how much money they've expended, and we'll make sure to bring every dollar to Connecticut that we are allowed under federal law. But as much as I think Connecticut is breathing a collective sigh of relief today, let's just remember that this storm is still circling around the state, and we still may see some additional impacts over the course of the day. More reason to remain vigilant. I'll add, I think the utilities have learned some lessons, and we're better prepared this storm than they have been in the past. I want to thank FEMA for being in constant touch with the delegation and with the governor, pre-positioning assets in Connecticut so that if we had the worst case, we would have been prepared. I think everybody stepped up and did their part, and let's watch the day as it proceeds to make sure this doesn't get any worse. The delegation will be vigilant about making sure that we get the federal dollars here that we need should we qualify for those programs. Governor?
Yeah, I'll just add to what Senator Murphy said. We made sure the utilities were prepared for the worst, and that was not the case last time around. And that meant the nursing homes and water filtration systems and all those critical infrastructure were risked, not to mention the people who live on the street. Their power is back up. Chris, thank you for welcoming us to beautiful Canterbury. All your streets are open almost, except for this one, thanks to us. I think we are better prepared. Henry did us a little bit of a favor, did Rhode Island no favors by taking a right turn and hitting landfall in Westerly, and we've sent some folks up to help there. I see the crews back here with Eversource. One guy's from Vermont, another from New Hampshire. They came from all over the region, rolled up their sleeves. And this is the town that had 95% of their power off. And today, almost everybody is on, and everybody I've been promised by Eversource will be on by the end of today. I just got off with the emergency operations team. It's sort of interesting what you find out. The Coast Guard is now flying up and down the coast to see what's at risk there. Red Cross is closing down their shelters at this point, ended up not needing them as much as we might have. Katie Dykes over at Environmental Protection is now rechecking all the dams. We checked them before the potential flooding. Now we're seeing them after the flooding. While Eversource's number of people who are without power is going down, United Illuminating, which has a lot more underground power, they've announced a few outages related there. So obviously wind gets the power lines in forested areas like this. UI, more underground, that's where there's a little more risk. But as Senator Blumenthal said, we're holding the utilities accountable. And we have performance-based regulation that's in place. And but little credit where credit's due. I think they stepped up. They had twice as many folks on the ground ready to go this time as last time. And that's the way we got to do it. Let's make this the norm. Thanks, everybody.
How do you guys separate the fact, your assessment of Eversource with the fact that the storm obviously just wasn't as severe here as we expected?
Well, it's some of both, but there were still 95% of the houses were without power right here in Canterbury. And you got to get the trucks here, you got to be able to manage that, and you got to prepare for the worst. You cannot allow these critical structures to go without power like almost happened in Isaiah.
I think we have to recognize the magnitude of the storm was far, far less than predicted. We were all ready for another Superstorm Sandy. And the utilities had many more crews on the ground. They were multiples in the range of 4,000 as opposed to 450 last time. Those are rough estimates, but certainly the utilities heard our message loud and clear. And they heard the governor and the legislature saying to utilities, you have to do this job right this time. Now the question is, what will happen next time? And as the governor said, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. They're going to be held accountable. We're going to be watching. And not only the response town by town, but home by home, business by business. And if people are complaining to us in days from now that their power isn't restored, we're going to go to bat for them, just as if the whole state were out. Because every person, as I was saying earlier, every person who is without power is in potential crisis, particularly when we're talking about nursing homes and small businesses that may be losing perishables and supplies and so forth. And I'll just add, on a little bit of off topic, fortunately, the lesser magnitude of the storm is going to enable more people to get vaccinated today. The FDA has fully and finally approved the Pfizer vaccine. And I'm hoping that the sunshine here in Canterbury, or at least the better weather, the less magnitude of the storm, will prompt more people to get vaccinated now that we're done with the worst of it. So I hope that we will see, instead of a storm surge, a vaccination surge.
Governor, for people who are not on the tour with us today, can you just talk them through what you saw driving up and down this road, what it looks like here, why you came to Canterbury?
I came to Canterbury because it was particularly hard hit. Came to Canterbury to see these beautiful trees, a tree-lined road. We love the beauty of it. It also means there's a lot of potential risk to the power lines here when they're above ground. And you can't trim all these trees. That doesn't work. You have to be able to respond quickly. And I think we did a better job of that this time. But, Mayor Chris, you've been on the front line. You've been taking calls from people. Do you want to tell us what you heard?
Well, I think
Could you come up here? Thanks.
the response, by and large, has been positive. Folks are happy that their power came on. I mean, we heard some predictions of 21-day outages, multiple-day outages. We're not looking at that, so it has been a fairly positive response. Although the person who doesn't have power now is, again, if you're the one without power, you feel it, you know it, and you're not happy about it. But I think Eversource, they did pretty good. Although I will say this: when I talked to our community liaison and told them that the governor was coming to town this morning, I never saw so many trucks coming into Canterbury before. So, yeah, I guess it's always good. You got a little bit of pull somewhere, but their response has been pretty good, and it's nice to see the crews get out here and get the power up. Like I said, we went from about 95, 96% down with 2,100 outages to about 500 as it stands now. So it's looking good.
Any damage to town property, whether it be trees that came down in parks or anything like that? Or?
Not that we've come across. Town Hall held up very well, but those who have been there know it's a new building and it doesn't have trees around it. Town Hall's held up pretty well. My biggest concern is we have a new storage shed up at DPW, and I was afraid the Clear Span building might turn into a sale, but that survived. I know we got a lot of hard work out of my Department of Public Works people who started yesterday at about 11 and had some guys out this morning at 4 o'clock responding to work with Eversource on that. But town, no damage to town, no property.
And roads mostly all open with some exceptions?
Roads now are looking mostly open. I communicated to a WINY a little bit earlier some of the road closures, and those change minute to minute. We've had some down lines which are getting cleaned up. Brooklyn Road that we're on was closed up until probably 8 o'clock this morning, and so yeah, they're pretty good. The response has been good, and everything's open now.
Governor, can you address, so how realistic a test was this about change in operations for the utilities? Your Pure chair made clear that they won't be judged on a 21-day event, which was the potential, but on really what turned out to be much smaller. So how good a test is this?
It's a dress rehearsal, but you could be sitting around with 50% of the houses without power, so we did better on that front. We didn't know what the problem was going to be 2 days ago. We thought it might be Hurricane Sandy, so they had the folks on the ground ready to go. I think the communication was much better. I mentioned the other day that, last time around we would have the municipal calls and every mayor had 8 questions and because they weren't getting any feedback from the utilities. This time we had much better regional coordination, regional operations centers. Every utility had a liaison to the region or to the town, and I think that helped a lot. So if it was a dress rehearsal, it was a pretty good dress rehearsal.
Did you see it as a test for your administration as well to make sure everything was operating smoothly and the response was, good overall?
Yeah, it was a test to see whether the regulatory imperatives that, Dick was talking about are having any teeth and making a difference, and I think they are. And now Marissa's going to be categorizing that pretty carefully.
And, there's going to be an effort to reform FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, based on Connecticut's leadership. Because this idea of performance-based standards really has to be taken nationwide. Too much of our utility industry is based on cost plus automatic profit. It has to be based on performance, and I've been advocating it for years with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We're going to have new leadership on that commission, I hope, that will take Connecticut as a model and look at everything from executive compensation to the rates that are charged ratepayers and the incentives that we provide for non-carbon based energy.
And it's likely that the costs of repair are going to be borne by the ratepayers, right? Because it looked like Eversource did prepare properly based on the best available.
Right, the reasonable costs of repair come back into the rate base, and that's something that Marissa will look at. Look, it's worth remembering that if this power goes out more than 3 days, they get a credit for $25 a day for each day that it's out. If they have medicine and food that's been spoiled, they get $250 to help compensate for that. More importantly, we looked at the performance after ICEA and said your rate of return is going from 9% to 8%. That maybe is not a number that means a lot to consumers. It's a number that means a lot to the CFO of Eversource, and that's why they have a lot of incentive to get it right, and I think they did this time.
And I don't mean to be cynical, but I can say maybe for the third time, they knew the governor was coming here, and they were here. They knew statewide the governor and the legislature was watching, and they stationed the crews. They should know we're going to be watching and holding them accountable. And if there is damage and they fail the state standards, and maybe those standards should be tougher so that ratepayers bear more of the burden of repairs if they fail to make those repairs earlier. But I think, as I said at the beginning, advocacy has an effect. Scrutiny and oversight produce results. That's what the performance-based system does statewide, but that's what proper regulation and oversight do at the state and the federal level.
Governor, were there any other towns that were especially hard hit besides Canterbury here in eastern Connecticut? Or?
Certainly, this particular region was the hardest hit, but there were some isolated hits. Stamford lost 1,000, a tree went down. Something in New Haven is launched as well. Some real flooding, I think, in the Manchester area. But I think this was the part of the state that was the hardest hit because you had the wind and the rain.
Can you talk about how to make a rural community like this more resilient? Your next stop, you're talking about resiliency. What can someone like this first selectman be focused on?
Well, I'll start and then...
You want me to take it?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, we've actually been working on resiliency in town. It's one of those things that for the past 2 years we've taken quite seriously. We had a gypsy moth infestation and a drought a couple years ago, and if you look above you, you'll see the dead oak trees. The town has taken down over 1,000 dead, diseased, and decaying trees on town-owned property along the rights-of-way, along the road edges, and that's been significant. What I think would work very well would be an education program with residents so they understand what the impact of their tree could be, because when a tree is on private property, there are private property rights that go with it. So an education program let residents understand that, and quite possibly for folks that are looking at the cost of removing a tree. Now, you take an oak tree in someone's yard, could be 50, 60 feet tall. That could be $5, $6, $7, $8, $1,000 or more to remove. So maybe a program in place that could help people afford to take those trees down to avoid them coming on power lines, but also to avoid them landing on their homes, landing on themselves, causing injury to property, injury to body.
So the federal government is about to become a much bigger partner in resiliency efforts. The bipartisan infrastructure bill proposes $1 billion to be sent to states to work on storm and climate resiliency efforts. One of my jobs in Washington is I chair the committee that writes the budget for FEMA. We're planning on supplementing that money perhaps with an additional $1 billion. So there's going to be significantly more federal money coming to Connecticut for storm resiliency and climate resiliency. A lot of times we think of resiliency as just a feature of improvements on the coastline. And I think a lot of that resiliency money will end up coming to New London and Groton and Old Saybrook. But some of it needs to come to the rest of Connecticut as well, because there are small projects that we can do here in Canterbury and throughout eastern Connecticut to make these communities more resilient. As Chris said, taking down trees on private property can be expensive. An education campaign doesn't necessarily come for free. So we're going to be looking at creative ways to make sure that we qualify for an increased flow of federal resiliency dollars that helps us continue our efforts to try to make these storms less impactful when they hit.
Our streams are overflowing. And if we have another half an inch of rain, they're the ones that are most at risk. So like Chris said, it's not just along the coast where you have the surge, but in towns like Canterbury, if you have a number of the streams that feed into a river, those are the ones that we're taking a close look at. So resiliency means protecting them, fixing our dams, and making sure you have some wetlands so where you can have some overflow, because that's the drainage system that keeps our roads safe.
May, you've seen a lot of this area. Do you want to comment?
Sure, thank you, Senator. And I want to thank Governor Lamont for being here today, and for Selectman Lipke for his leadership, and Senators Murphy and Blumenthal for being here. My name is May Flexer. I'm the state senator here in Canterbury and 7 other communities in northeastern Connecticut. And I guess I would just add a couple of things. First of all, kudos to people like First Selectman Lipke, because when these storms happen, they're the ones who have to step away from their families and be, just like the governor, out there all the duration of the storm to make sure that the impact is fully understood, and that communication train that we've been talking about today is clear. I'm really pleased to see the legislation that we passed last year to have real impact, but let's just be clear. If the impact of this storm had been stronger, a community like Canterbury would be very far down on the list to have the kind of restoration that we've had here in the last 24 to 36 hours. So hopefully the new laws that we put in place will make sure that communities like those here in northeastern Connecticut do have their power restored in a quicker manner, because I've had the pleasure of representing communities here in northeastern Connecticut for several years, and I've watched as smaller events than what we've experienced this weekend have taken a much longer period of time to get that power turned back on, and we all know how critical that is for people, and it can have some life-changing circumstances. So I'm really pleased to see the restoration happening here so quickly. I'm hopeful this will be a new start for Eversource in making sure communities like Canterbury aren't dealing with long-term impacts in future events. And then finally, I would just also add that this storm and others make it crystal clear that everything we're doing, and I want to thank Governor Lamont for his leadership and our two senators for their leadership in Washington, needs to be viewed through the lens of climate change. These kinds of events are going to become more and more frequent, and we need to be doing everything we can to not just be prepared for events like this, but making the changes we have to make in our everyday lives and at the state, local, and federal level to combat climate change. Thank you.
So as we used to say in the trial lawyer business, the jury's still out.
Yeah.
Governor, I have to ask a COVID question before I let you go. What was your reaction to the FDA approval of the vaccine? Do you expect that will increase vaccination in Connecticut?
You probably saw that the FDA has now given final approval to at least the Pfizer vaccine after a couple 100 million doses over a period of well over a year. I think it was the right move, and I think it gives people a little extra confidence if there was any hesitancy that it's absolutely safe as well as effective. FDA has given it yet another stamp of approval. Now's the time to get your vaccine.
Has there been any further fallout from the vaccine mandate for state employees, or is that going smoothly so far?
I don't know about smoothly, but we're having a good, positive discussions. I think the leaders, labor leaders and the legislative leaders know how important it is to get everybody vaccinated, and we're just working out the terms of engagement. But we're going to get all of our state employees vaccinated, or at least in testing, in the very near term. Thanks, everybody.